Now we want to look at the regulation of bone calcium levels, right? So if we go back to, the beginning, right? So we have these special type of stem cells called osteocyte osteoprogenitors. So osteoprogenitors give rise to more specialized lineages of cells. They branch off into two regions. One is called the osteoclast, and the other is the osteoblast, right? And osteoblasts are basically immature cells that are now coined. When they maturize further, they become osteocytes. So each of these cells, specifically we're going to focus on osteoclasts and osteocytes, are involved with calcium regulation, right? So osteoclasts are responsible for bone resorption. So what does resorption mean? Resorption means dissolving, right? So breaking down of bone, right? So let's even put that there, break down of bone, right? And then the osteocytes are responsible for bone reabsorption. So reabsorbing. So what does that mean? So the bone calcium level increases, right? The level of calcium inside there, right? So we can also another term we can say build. So breaking and building. All right. And so these two cell types are at constant war in order to either regulating high calcium, low calcium, high calcium, and they're all being controlled in order to maintain a homeostatic balance, right? So calcium is not only present, it's not only required for the bone, right? So if you remember the cardiac muscle tissue, they require calcium. So blood calcium levels are very highly regulated. If it becomes too much, it can lead to a lot of other pathological conditions, right? So two specific hormones that are responsible for these homeostatic balance is, number one is PTH, parathyroid hormone. So parathyroid hormone leads to the activation of osteoclasts, right? And so we said bone resorption, right? So it breaks down bone. So if I have some kind of pathological condition like hyperparathyroidism, this is a condition where your body secretes too much parathyroid hormone, right? Too much. So you have an increased activation of osteoclast activity. So if I were to look at, for example, my bone calcium versus my blood calcium, so if I have my calcium levels for the bone versus the calcium levels in my blood, what can you notice about their concentration if I have hyperparathyroidism, right? So if I have this condition here, right? You have excessive levels of osteoclast activity. Osteoclast activity leads to the bone breakdown. So you can say that the actual bone calcium levels decrease, whereas the blood calcium levels increase, right? Because the calcium has to go somewhere. It's either in the bone or in the blood. If it breaks down, it goes directly into the bloodstream, leading to a rise of blood levels, right? Another hormone that's involved with the homeostatic regulation of calcium regulation here is called calcitonin. So calcitonin is a hormone that is secreted by your thyroid. So parathyroid hormone is secreted by these four lobes in your thyroid called the parathyroid gland, right? So they're responsible for osteoclast activity, Calcitonin is secreted from thyroid gland. And the calcitonin is responsible for activation of osteocytes. And we said osteocytes' main function is calcium reabsorption, right? So if I have a condition where the body secretes very high levels of calcitonin, what would that happen? So if I have the same condition here, so you have calcium levels here of the bone and the calcium levels of the blood. So if I have too much calcitonin, this will lead to increased calcium in the bone and decrease from the blood, right? So there needs to be moving very, very consistently back and forth, right? So a lot of patients that experience osteoporosis, right? So a lot of postmenopausal women osteoporosis. This is basically a condition where micropores begin in the actual bone of postmenopausal women, which can eventually lead to fractures and immobility. So these patients, because of the lack of estrogen, lose their actual identity of the actual bone. So they need some kind of supplementation. So what are some kind of supplementations they use? Well, people use vitamin D's, estrogen supplements, but a very common supplement they use is they supplement these patients with calcitonin. So remember, calcitonin activates osteocyte activity, which equals increase calcium in the bone. So what can you tell me about the bone densities? Does the bone become more dense, or it becomes more brittle and thin whenever calcitonin becomes active? So when calcitonin becomes active, and it's being actively released to cause osteocytes to begin bone reabsorption, this can lead to the increase in density of the bone. Vice versa, if you have a condition, for example, of hyperparathyroidism, a very common symptom of hyperparathyroidism is looking at the actual density of the bone. The bone density begins to decline, right? So it becomes very brittle and damaged.